Welcome to the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. The stories we tell ourselves and others shape the lives we lead. I'm your host, Daralyse Lyons. This journey of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast has been beyond exciting and fulfilling for me. I had no idea when we started where this would go or the stories that I would hear. And I'm excited, but also sad to announce that this will be the last episode of this season of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. We're taking a break to work on some new projects and develop some new concepts. And this has been just such an enriching experience to be able to sit down with people and listen to some of their most sacred moments, their ups, their downs, their highs and lows. And looking back, I was thinking about the first story that I told on this podcast about coming to yoga and, just sort of falling apart before it all came together, and how much life has changed and shifted for me personally and professionally. And one thing that I've just been thinking about again and again and again is how, in yoga and in life, I think it's really about taking things moment by moment and having those big goals, but also being willing to take little divergences and twists and turns along the way and take things one breath and one moment and one episode at a time. So I'm just really, really grateful and really inspired to be able to be in conversation, to have been in conversation with you this past year and a half or however long it's been, and to continue that conversation in forthcoming seasons and in new and interesting ways, but to take a little bit of a break while we regroup and figure out exactly how that's going to look. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. So I hope you'll watch this last episode or listen to this last episode. And if you haven't seen and or heard all the previous episodes, go back and catch up on those. And to be continued, because this is really just the beginning of a story. And I don't know what the end is going to be, but this is certainly not it. And so thank you so much for how much you've supported this far. And and stay tuned. And please go to my website, www.daralyselyons.com. That's DARALYSELYONS. And subscribe to the newsletter so that you will you'll be notified when the next step is around the corner. And yeah, thanks so much. Before we really delve into our last episode of this season of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast, I just want to take a moment to thank all of my guests who have just been so amazing this season and have been willing to really talk about the deep and dark places in their lives and their moments of transformation. And I really want to give a special thanks to this season's sponsors, without whom this podcast would not have been possible. So many, many thanks to Loving Healing Press, Just Strong, Kismet Co-work, and the Renfrew Center. And you can find out more about each of them in this episode's show notes. And thank you so much for making this possible. So we started off, the first ever episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast was about the importance of character and how we can make choices about the kind of characters that we want to be and the kind of people that we want to embody. And I was thinking that in this episode, I would like to talk about plot, because I think they're like the two most important story elements are character and plot. It's who we are and then what happens to us and around us, and the direction that our lives take. And so, in thinking about plot and thinking about this notion of the tangible events in our lives, I was looking back and reflecting on just this past season of the Transformational Storyteller podcast and on all these moments that happened in people's lives that they had no control over. Whether it was a difficult health diagnosis, the death of a loved one, choices that were made by the adults in their lives when they were very young children and they had no say, in that. And I was just thinking about how, I think there are just a couple of different ways that things happen to and around us. There are the things that we have zero control over, just the life events that are completely outside of our ability to influence. And yes, those are the moments when character is so important, because it's like, how do we want to make whatever happened outside of us? How do we want to make that have meaning in our lives? What do we choose to do with that? But then there are also the moments, the plot points, that we do get to determine, the goals that we set for ourselves, and then our ability to execute on those goals. The choices that we make in difficult moments or good moments or joyous moments, about what we're going to do and how we're going to move forward. And I'm so grateful. One of the things I was not expecting at all to come out of this podcast, and in fact, I wasn't really expecting anything. I didn't know going into it what was going to happen, but people had said to me, I think you should have a podcast. And I thought, all right, enough people have said this that I'm going to do it. But one of the things I was not expecting to come out of it was just sitting down with people and listening to their stories has propelled me to want to do more and more of that. And so I've gotten into journalism, which was just the coolest and most interesting thing, to now be able to really try to tackle stories that matter and tell them in a somewhat coherent way. And I was thinking about how most of the choices that I've made in my life about how I want to move forward and the things I want to do, I had no idea going into it what was going to be on the other side, and I'm a person who I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know about me if you follow my work at all or have seen me doing any interviews, but I am a person who is so type A and kind of controlling and goes into things with an agenda, thinking that I know how to get from point A to point Z. And what I'm discovering just more and more is that sometimes the most exciting opportunities in my life, the most transformational plot points, have happened just by me being willing to kind of go along for the ride and see what happens. And I'm reminded a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Italy just on a whim. It was like a spur of the moment thing. And it was an amazing, amazing trip and an amazing opportunity. And what I learned about my willingness to say yes and just go, is that as much as I want to control the trajectory of my life, and as important as I believe it is to have goals and dreams and aspirations, and then to go about making those things happen, I think that sometimes the most exciting twists and turns on the journeys of our lives come from just being open to whatever's next, and being willing to kind of go with that flow. In the first episode of this podcast, I was talking about coming to yoga and how I went to my first ever yoga class, and the teacher said, take a deep breath and feel your feelings. And I took a deep breath and I cried for the next hour and a half. And, I was talking about that experience from a perspective of like character and changing and shifting. But when I think about yoga and, and the idea of plot and movement and moving forward and the events that happened to us and the events that we're making happen as we move forward in life, I was thinking about, just how in the course of a yoga class, it's really about transitioning from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and doing it in a way where, I'll speak for myself though, where I am just fully being in that moment and letting myself be uncomfortable and letting myself breathe into the spaces of emotion and sensation, and move from one stage to the next stage to the next stage with an openness and a capacity to just take in whatever's being offered, and also to make some choices along the way about what will and won't work for me and what I do and don't want. And so I think, whether it's in the course of my everyday life, or in the course of my writing practice or my yoga practice, or, the stories I'm creating about other people, or just this wild and twisty and turny life story that I'm living, just being willing to kind of embrace the unknown has been one of the most exciting things for me when it comes to plot. Yes, when it comes to just the everyday experiences of life and those big and exciting and flashy moments, and also the not so exciting everyday moments that, that have to get done, like doing the laundry and, because I think life, I have a friend who says that life is about, 10% horrible, excruciating moments, like moments that you would wish to undo if you could, deaths, disease, all the painful moments. She said, life is about 10% of that. And then it's about 10%, these phenomenal, exciting moments, births and weddings and, skydiving and travel. It's these awesome, light you up from the inside moments that you wouldn't wish to change either. And she said that, the other 80% of life is kind of just in between, it's what we choose to make of it. And I find that for me, when I'm willing to just be open in those 80% of moments when life is what I'm making of it, the trajectory of my life goes so much better, and I'm way more excited and optimistic, and I find just moments of magic. And I think I knew that before setting out on this journey and interviewing people and sitting down with one after another incredible guests. But it's been so much more cemented for me, and listening to people who have come through, whether it be a diagnosis like cancer or a brain tumor or the death of a spouse, or coming through an eating disorder or an addiction issue or a brain injury. People have been through just really significant things, people who I've had the opportunity to sit down with and talk about their stories. And again, what I find is that they chose to make meaning out of the darkest moments of their life, and they chose to use that meaning to move forward and make empowered decisions about how they want to live, the people they want to surround themselves with, the journeys they want to take, whether it be changes in jobs, whether it be, travel opportunities, or just taking on new hobbies. And I've been really inspired by that, and it's challenged me to look at the choices I'm making in my life and these important plot points and the trajectory of where I'm going. And sometimes it just takes these little subtle micro shifts to make big differences in terms of where we end up in life. And so yeah, I'm so grateful that you've joined me thus far on this journey. And I hope that some of what you've seen over the past, 20 plus episodes has challenged and encouraged you to make some different choices in your life and maybe experience some things that you might not have been able to experience. And in terms of the trajectory of where we're going, I hope, together, this is just the beginning. It is certainly not the end. And I'm really excited to see where this creative podcast process takes things. And I hope you will be too. And to that end, if you go to my website, you can sign up for my newsletter and just be made aware of any sort of announcements about cool and exciting things that are happening in the future, and also stay up to date about, when this podcast will be coming back. So my website is www.daralyselyons.com. That's DARALYSELYONS.com. I hope you'll go there, and you can find all past podcast episodes there and just stay connected with me that way. But one of the things that I've asked all of my guests this season is, if you were to look back at the story of your life, and there was a moral or a lesson or a theme that you were going to draw from that, what would that theme be? And I don't think I've ever asked myself that question or answered that question for myself, and I think it's ever changing. But in this moment, today, just looking back at where I've been and where I want to go, I guess the theme that I would highlight would really be exploration, because I think that being willing to be curious and being willing to just seek with an open mind and an open heart, and to explore new possibilities and challenge myself, like that attitude, I don't always have it. I am so far from perfect. Like I am so far from perfect. It's not even funny. But being able to explore and to be open has made my life a life that I wouldn't trade for the world. And I feel like I'm always learning and evolving and growing. And in the moments when I'm not growing and not evolving, just being able to wake up the next day and be willing to explore the various opportunities that come at me. Looking back, I never thought I'd make it to 36 because I was on a path to destruction, but I certainly never thought I would be in a place where I'm living the life that, I want to say the life of my dreams, but it's not, because I didn't have these dreams going into it. Like I didn't know, I didn't know how awesome life could be. And so just being open and taking it one day and one step and one moment at a time with a curious and inquisitive spirit has, it's really been transformational for me. So thank you so much for tuning into this final episode of the first season. And like I said, this is just the beginning. It is certainly not the end. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. As always, thanks to our episode sponsors, our production team at Rebel Hill Consulting, and of course, many thanks to you, the listener. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're creating stories that empower you and inspire others.